All right, and we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation, where podcasters from all over the world come together to support each other, help each other, knock it out, try and create a situation where the rising tide raises all ships. There is power in the group. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and I think I've analogied you guys to death at this point, but that is what we're doing. There's a brand new podcast, and let me tell you something. I put it out, and I started asking people, "Hey, would you like to be on this podcast?" I wanted to get some unique folks. I didn't want to have just you know, um, John Smith in his basement talking about politics or something. So we basically have reached out to some really interesting folks, and I've got a couple of guys for you today that are going to be on the show, and they have a very unique thing, which I think is a great way of life. But I'm going to let you make your own decision here, folks. So um, today, welcome our guests from the Whiskey Chaser podcast. Okay, did I get that right? Did I get the S in the right spot?
That's
Whiskey
Yep.
Chaser podcast.
Mhm.
All right, we got Steve Heyman and Nick Berkey. Steve and Nick, how you guys doing? Thanks for joining us.
Doing great. How about yourself?
I'm fantastic. I've had a little too much coffee, in case you haven't noticed, but we're rocking and
We haven't
rolling.
had enough whiskey yet, but
One of us has to be able to drive home,
right,
so.
exactly.
All right. Listen, everybody at home, as soon as I say the name, is thinking, okay, so this is Whiskey Chaser.
Mhm.
What is the show about? Tell me there. What's the show about? What do you guys do? How do you run it? I know it's not just you guys sitting there drinking whiskey, right?
No. It's a little bit more in depth. That's what Chris does. But no, we talk about the whiskey distilleries. So we go into depth around the craft distilleries and the bigger ones, kind of go into their history, how they got started, and sample their product and decide what we do a little bit of a review, but also go into that detail on those distilleries and how they got their start. Yep.
Nice. Now, from
Mhm.
what I understand, you guys do you do some of these or on location at the distillery? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so we've had some really cool opportunities over the 3 years that we've been doing this. We've got connected with distilleries, like local craft distilleries, that we've been able to go in and interview. And so we've had a few different ones where we'll go on site, and it changes just a little bit on what we talk about. We still try to go over the history, why you do what you do, that kind of thing. Um, but we get a chance to talk to either the owner, or the owner and master distiller, and really dive into what got you started and where was the passion. What is the passion that drives this, for one? And then how do you decide from there? I've got a passion for whiskey. How do you decide what kind of whiskey you make, and what's the mash bill look like, and how do you decide time frame and investment, and all these different things to create what you put out. The idea behind really all of that is understanding what drives you, and understanding there's time, there's investment, there's a lot that's needed to go into whiskey to create good whiskey, and not just white lightning or moonshine. There's a lot of time and effort that takes into you have to take into account and think about. But then trying to decide, when is a barrel ready, and when do we pull it, and how do we decide what that looks like? Is it a group decision? Is it our own? And it's been really fun to do this because you get to meet a lot of families that run distilleries together. You get to meet a lot of owners that did not intend on starting distilleries, that found a passion for creation, and then you find ones that really are the weird experimental people that just have they sit down with you and they're like, I don't want to leave because I found someone that wants to talk whiskey. They don't want to talk about the popular stuff. They don't want to talk about what's big on the market right now. They really want to. They get why I do what I do, and they really want to talk about that. They see something in that, and they don't want us to leave from the interview. It's been fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I listened to when I first heard it, I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be fun, right? And I got to connect with you guys through friend of a friend,
Yep.
type of thing. And you did mention Chris. Now, Chris is your third. He's
Yes.
also on the show. He's just not able to be with us here today, right?
Yep. Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. We don't want to leave Chris out. I don't want Chris
Yes.
going, hey, man,
No.
what happened? I didn't get my plug, so.
Right.
Right.
All right. I got to know now. you guys are, I mean, were you friends before this, or are you friends because of this? What's the relationship
So
there?
yeah, so we met, Nick and I met through work. So we worked at the same place for a while, and that's kind of how we met, and just realized we both liked whiskey. Nick more than myself. So Nick and Chris are brothers-in-law. So
Okay.
the two of them met obviously through that.
Yeah.
But they started this whiskey club and invited me to join that. And so we started this club where we all get together and drink and buy the more expensive bottles you wouldn't necessarily buy on your own. And that's how that got started. I was a big podcaster, really liked podcasting, and wanted to start my own. So roped him into joining. And that's how we get that.
I
Were
think
you-
the pitch.
Go ahead.
I think the pitch from Steve was, "Hey, so I really want to start a podcast. I don't know what about. You guys are really good at talking about whiskey. How about we start the podcast? You guys just talk, and that'll be kind of what it is." Chris and I
I
were like, "What do
see.
you mean? We're just going to sit and talk in front of mics? Yeah, and drink whiskey." Okay, all right, that's cool.
I'm starting to see the dynamic here. How this
Yeah.
works. All right, so we've got Nick and Chris who are over here chilling,
Yeah.
Yep.
having a bottle on the rocks, and then we got Steve coming in going, "Hey, let's make this a business. I want to do a podcast."
Right.
What we're talking about. Steve, let me
Yes.
ask you: were you doing a podcast or thinking of doing one or anything before this came about? What was your thought on that?
I listened to a lot of podcasts and thought it'd be something interesting to start, but had never gone down the rabbit hole of actually starting one. This was
Okay.
the first endeavor I went into.
Well, and apparently it worked out. You guys have been doing
It did.
this
It worked out pretty well.
upwards of 3 years is what you just told me in the
Yeah.
pre-interview.
Yeah.
3 years drinking whiskey and
Yeah,
talking
I
about.
know.
It's
We haven't
really-
ran out of bottles yet either.
It's really hard to when people are like, "How long have you been doing this?" I have to sit there and think, okay, I think I know how long has the club been going? And then I have to try to base it off of when the club started. To be like, okay, well, we started, 2 or 3 months in from the club. So we're on this year for the club. That means we're about this year for the podcast. And it never feels that long when
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh, really? That 3 years?" Yeah, we sit in Chris's basement in his pipe and gun room and we drink and talk. That's really what we do.
Yeah.
Did you really
Yeah.
just say to me, pipe and gun room?
Yep.
Pipe and gun room. Yeah.
Pipe and
I
gun
am
room.
loving every minute of
Yeah.
this. I love this.
Tobacco pipes are also a big part of the show, as
Right.
it turns out.
Oh my gosh. And you guys are out of, is it Ohio? Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. We're in
Okay,
Columbus.
so
Or
you're
near
not
Columbus.
far from me, man. I'm going to have to come
No.
visit this
Yeah.
pipe
Come
room.
by.
But okay, that's wonderful. Now I do want to, I don't want to digress because I do want,
Yeah.
we're having fun, and that's awesome. But
Yeah.
I don't want people to think this is some sort of, like guys getting drunk, jokey show.
No.
Right.
No.
I listened to several of your episodes here,
Mhm.
just in preparation for meeting you guys after I found out about the podcast. And you guys, I mean, you're not sitting around going, "Oh yeah, it's yummy." You know what I mean? You're not like, "Oh, less filling tastes great." I mean, you guys are over here, your stuff. I mean, you're
think we do.
dissecting. You
Yeah.
sound like it. I'm not going to joke with you. You sold
Yeah.
me. I mean, 5 minutes into the episode, I'm like, dang, these guys know their stuff. You're dissecting the bottle. You're talking about the bouquet and everything else.
Mhm.
Where'd you guys learn all this stuff?
So for
They're
me,
laughing. I'm worried. They're laughing.
I'm
All right.
I'm newer in the whiskey world. So like when I met Nick, my experience with whiskey was that I knew what was a bad whiskey and what was a good whiskey. I couldn't tell you what was a great whiskey. I couldn't piece those together, those different flavors to say this one's worth the money, this one's not. And so I was the newbie in the group. Chris is the one with the master palate. He's the one that really understands those flavors and can really pull that stuff out.
Oh, okay.
And so the original pitch of the show was, hey, let me be the idiot. Let me just tell you, let me just ask questions and you guys just talk. And that's how it kind of started. It's grown since then. I've kind of gotten my own palate and my own opinions now versus the beginning. And my passion's always been history. So I go down the history rabbit hole. I kind of go down the figuring out how these guys got started and all of that. And Nick is a nice balance of the two. He's got a really good palate also, but is also interested in the business side of it.
Yeah, you could say well balanced.
Yeah.
So Chris and I got started in this whole whiskey realm. I used to travel. I used to live in Indiana, so I traveled for work quite a bit, and I'd always come to Columbus, or Cincinnati area. So I'd always find a way to stop at his place and spend the night, and then come back home. Well, when I first started doing that, he would get a bottle, brand new bottle. We'd go out and find one we never had before, and we'd sit down, we'd crack it open, and we'd almost finish it that night. And it would normally just be us just sitting there chatting, because it would be, a couple months since we've seen each other. So we would find a way just to be able to bond and talk and really just share what was going on in life. Then turned into, this is really good whiskey. Here's kind of what I'm getting out of it. And when Steve came to us and said, "Hey, let's start this podcast," both Chris and I said, "Well, we don't want to be like every other whiskey podcast or YouTube channel where it's here's the profile I'm getting, here's the notes, here's, all of this and that. That's the market's saturated with that. And we don't want our view or our opinion to be what people go after. We want them to be interested in the bottle because of the history or because of this or because of that. And we want them to be able to decide on themselves what they feel the taste is, good or bad. We want them to be able to decide that. So with that in mind, the whole idea of how did we learn all this stuff about notes and tasting? It was just going through several bottles of this is really good and this is really bad.
Trial and error in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
huh?
it was
Okay.
very much trial and error. Yes.
All
There's
right.
also a good time to mention these were college days, and we don't drink that
Yes.
much anymore. It's good to be responsible with your
Yes.
alcohol.
Thanks for throwing that disclaimer in there, right? Because there's so many awesome parts just to that whole story. One of the things we talk about on this podcast that you guys are being interviewed on is why you started a podcast instead of something else and what goes into it. This story itself it's fun. Your friends. It came from friendship. I mean, even you guys just sitting there drinking the bottle was about bonding, and catching up. I mean, this is just one of those things where when I'm listening to your podcast, I feel like I should be sitting there holding the glass at the table, chiming in with you. I mean, I just feel like one of the guys at the table. You guys are conversational, you're educational because the history part's cool. But is that intentional? And do you recognize that that's how you're bringing in your listeners?
Yeah, I think if you listen to really early episodes, it is just three dudes in a room and just talking. And so it took a little bit of time to like get a little bit more of a flow together that doesn't we try really hard to not structure too much because then it takes away that conversation and you don't want to structure we're not presenting to anybody else is
Mhm.
kind of the goal. We want to be three guys in a room talking, but we want to make sure to also get the information needed. So there is some thought to like we want to make sure we stay at least somewhat on topic. The cutting room floor is full of a lot of things when we get off topic, but yeah, so we do make a goal of trying to stay at least a little bit on topic and going, but also not adding a ton of structure to take away that conversational element.
Definitely wanted it to feel natural.
Yeah.
Right. So
Mhm.
you talk about that idea of I feel like I'm in the room with you guys. I feel like I'm sitting at the table and I'm having a glass with you guys. We do this in his pipe and gun room, and we're all sitting in leather chairs. There's really no tables. And so for you to be like, I want to be a part of this somehow, some way, shape, or form, I can imagine myself being a part of it. I feel like I don't want to speak totally for Chris, but
Mhm.
for Chris and I feel like that's what we kind of wanted. We didn't want to be just like everyone else where I've got these note cards. Now I got to take notes on what this tastes like and how this feels. I would rather be a part of the conversation in the sense that I'm sitting there with a glass and now I can participate in the conversation. It's not secluded. It's not like it's an exclusive thing that, ooh, only Chris, Steve, and Nick can talk about this bottle this way. No, you can pour yourself a glass and tell us what you think, and we'll probably look and go, Yeah, I think you're right. That sounds about right. That sounds good. And
That's
we can have
awesome.
that conversation about it. We've had we had one guy that was a part of the club that was an avid listener, and he would listen on his way to work, and I'd get these phone calls from him. And like you talked about, like it felt like I was in the room. He'd call me up and be like, I was yelling at you guys through the stereo because I wanted to join in on the conversation. You
Right.
said something, I was like, that's not right. I don't think that's right. And so like I wanted to join in and be a part of it, but I couldn't. So like that piece you talk about, I don't know that it was the intentions from the beginning, but it's definitely something that we've grown to really enjoy. Is anyone can join in on the conversation, want to be a part of it, and that's what we'd love to be a part of. Is have people be a part of this and wanting to dive deeper, or just sit there and grab a glass and talk about nothing, about life, just about anything you want. Perfectly fine with that.
All right, and I love all that. And Steve, you mentioned, that you really were intrigued by podcasting, okay? And you brought the idea to them. Why podcasting as opposed to, YouTube channel or, some TikTok thing or Twitter or what is it now? X, any of this
X,
other
yeah.
stuff. You guys, you chose podcasting, you were excited about podcasting. What was it that made you want to go down that road in particular?
So as I was thinking about this, there's kind of three options: video, audio, or word or written. And writing, I just don't think I'm good enough for that. So didn't want to go down the blog route. We do have a small blog, and I'll try to maybe do a little bit more with that. I'm learning to write. But video though was just too much work, and we didn't have three cameras and thousands of dollars to put together to make a quality YouTube channel. It's something that we could probably look into later on, but as a way of starting out, I thought that something like us just chatting in a room is exactly what a podcast is made for. I want you to hear our voices, our inflections. What are we actually thinking about in all this that you wouldn't get from writing, where now it's a lecture or something like that, and visually, we just didn't have the stuff to make it quality, which we would want to do. Yeah.
Gotcha. I love that. There's a lot of gurus that are out there that are trying to sell people, $5,000 courses on how to start a podcast and everything else. I always laugh, at that. I tell people all the time, it's really inexpensive. It's really just about wanting to do it and taking messy action. Like just go, record something.
Yep.
What was your, when you started, what was your setup? Did you, and get a loan and invest a bunch of money and buy the big boards and everything else? Or did you guys go get like, the little $5 mic from Walmart and, get rolling, with a blanket over your head, right?
So episode 1, there's only one episode that was like this because we quickly realized this wasn't going to work.
Nope.
But episode 1 is a MacBook in that pipe and gun room with Nick and Chris. And then me at a library that had like a soundproof room with like a setup. So we did that separate because then I had that setup that I could kind of look through stuff and see what it looks like and everything. The problem is libraries look down upon you bringing in a bottle of alcohol. So,
So we couldn't do it there.
It didn't really work with the flow to have them two enjoying a bottle and me not. So that was just one episode of that. After that, we had just a few episodes with just a Yeti Blue mic. And so one mic for the three of us. I had a friend that had a horror podcast, and it had fallen through at some point in the past. So we had this one Yeti mic that we split between the three of us and had just one sound. It wasn't long that we switched and had 3 separate mics.
Yep.
So within the first year, shortly after the first year, we have kind of our current setup. We have 3 Rode Pod mics and a Zoom P4 that we go through. And so that's kind of our setup now, and we've stuck with it. We've added a 4th one for those interviews and stuff. So we have that. But for the most part, it's these 3 separate mics and going through a Zoom P4.
Right on. Okay, so fairly inexpensive to get going.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
And so even our current setup is still like $300 or $400, I think, something like that. I think the
yeah,
mics are like $100, and the P4, I think it came as a set for like 400 or 500,
right.
something like that originally. Yeah.
Not totally outrageous once you get going. I
No.
mean, 3 years in, you can spend some money and you can, upgrade.
Right.
Right. Um, the You've been doing the podcast for 3 years. Best part about doing the podcast and the worst part about doing the podcast.
Yeah.
And you guys were already laughing. I knew there'd be an answer here. So,
So yeah.
best part and worst
Best
part, and
part,
maybe you want to
best
like.
part's easy. The three of us are sitting in a room drinking whiskey. I mean, that's an easy part of it. Honestly, we joked that we'd be doing the same thing without the podcast. The podcast is the excuse to let our wives leave the house and come and do this. Otherwise, we'd be hanging out with her or them instead of her, and it'd be bad. So, that's the easy part. And for all of us, we get to try new bottles, try new pipes, all that stuff. It's been great on that end. The harder part is probably the editing. Now I won't answer that completely because I started doing the editing. Now Nick does the editing. So it's switched over to him. But I think that is probably the harder part. And now it's the maybe I would say that it's the growing process. It's trying to we're no longer need to be three guys in a room talking. We need to like, oh, we should probably share this with people and like get it out there and grow the podcast and do more social media and all of that stuff. So that's probably the harder part now on my end.
Yeah.
Nick?
Man, the best part, I think Steve hit on it. It's the relationships. It's the relational aspect of not just the three of us getting in a room and just being able to drink and chat and talk. It's that plus us being able to have a reason or excuse to be able to contact some of these distilleries and really get to show their what they're good at. We get to show them off. And there's some of these distilleries are ones you would never think of or never hear of. And now we get an opportunity to show the weird ones off to people that pique their interest and go, I want to go meet that guy. I want to go see what that's about. And the relational drive for me of just being able to build the relationship with Steve and Chris. Chris is brother-in-law, so like we see each other more often than what we did before. But we like to joke around that the three of us probably wouldn't be hanging out or friends outside of this. We wouldn't really find a connection outside of this. And now it's gotten so to the point where like the nephews, so Chris has two kids, the nephews look for Steve whenever he comes over, looks for us whenever they get excited about this. So it's being able to build that relationship together over just sitting down and talking into a mic and drinking at the same time,
Right.
which can be harder to do sometimes. But the hard part, I think the most difficult one is it's the editing's gotten better. I think you talk about growing pains and like trying to figure out how do I go from a computer, a laptop with a microphone to now we've got four mics that can be recorded separately, and how do we edit those out so it makes sense to people. We're no longer talking over each other because we have no other mics to really decide who talks and who doesn't. That was really hard at first and trying to figure out that and navigate that. I would agree with Steve. Now that we've kind of got that navigated, it's how do we grow? How do we get people in a position like you, where you're saying, I want to be in the room with you. I want to sit at the table with you. How do we find people like that and really let them participate? How do we let them want to be a part of it and let them be a part of it? It's one thing to listen to it and go, "Ooh, it sounds really good." I'll go out and buy a bottle like that and I'll try it, and it just doesn't taste as good as what they're talking about. There's that relational aspect in that as well of trying to figure out how do I through this mic and through the stereo, how do I get people to want to be a part of this? How do I get people to want others to be a part of it too? And how do I help them build that community together because of this? That's
Very,
hard.
yeah, that's very well said, both you guys. And that's, what you just touched on there, Nick, is one of the biggest issues for any podcaster is how do I promote? You know, because there's a zillion thoughts, and everybody will tell you to post 75 times on every single platform of social media and do content for free, and reels, and blah blah blah. What has been your most effective method so far? And I know you're in search of, but so far, because you've been around for a while, what's been your most effective method of promoting the show so far?
I think the main thing we found early on was we found a group of people that really liked the show and weren't afraid to talk about it. So it was finding people that were not afraid to share it with other people, and also making some connections in like liquor stores and things like that wouldn't be afraid to say, "Hey, we have this store pick. It's going to be on this podcast." And share it that way. That's really hard to do here in Ohio because we're a state controlled state, so that's not
Wow.
really an option here. But we have a lot of the Indiana connections over there, so we we do it over in Indiana mainly.
I didn't hear a thing.
Yeah, right.
It's
Yeah.
all legal.
I mean, we got moonshine runners now going over state lines. I feel like the Dukes of Hazzard are going to come out any minute. And, that's okay. That's awesome.
Can
How
I touch
about?
on?
Oh yeah, I was just going to
Yeah.
say. Go
So
ahead.
yeah.
You first.
So what Steve was talking about, I would agree. Like we found early on that personal connection is what drove people to want to listen and want to talk about it. We tried, and we're still trying the whole Facebook. Can we post on Facebook, and how many times on Facebook? And Steve and I were talking about the other day, and he brought up to me, he said, if you think about it, everyone that we're posting on Facebook, on our page and doing that, they're already listening to the podcast. They're already involved. So we're pretty much just promoting to our audience that's already listening that they're going to talk about it. So is it worth our time spending all of our energy and resources into pouring into Facebook to have Facebook posts on our page that people are already on the page are going to be listening to it? Or is it worth trying to find more of those relationships, more of the word of mouth, the people that we can invest in, the people that we can pour into? I think of like liquor store owners. We've got one in Indiana that we've grown really close with. That he loves. He always asks for business cards from us. Of like, I want to hand them out to people, and always wants to talk about what we do and the podcast. And he gets excited about it because whenever we bring it up in the podcast, his response is that drives more business into me. And if I can drive more business into you, then it's a win-win for both of us. We can work together to try to drive each other more business
Right on.
and more listeners. And it's been fun to watch that because it's someone that gets it. It's someone that sees. It's not it's not like a I scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's more of I'm going to exist because you exist. And if you don't exist, then I have one less thing to try to help me out at the same time. So
Sure.
the existence of both of us might struggle if we don't understand we exist together and we work together in this.
It's the concept of this entire podcast.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I'm totally in touch with that. I was pausing for a minute, gathering my thoughts, because the grassroots, thing that you guys are talking about is phenomenal. There are a few things that are more effective than word of mouth and having a community and getting it going. A lot of our podcasters, a lot of people I know personally, a lot of people I've gotten to know since I started this project and since I've been doing my other podcasts that I do, they're alone. And there's a lot of folks who have a lot to say, but they really don't network a lot on a one-on-one, in-person level. You guys are all friendly guys. I mean, you're affable the whole bit. I mean, I'm sure you could sit down and have a drink with anybody at any time and, talk it up. The social media landscape is kind of where a lot of people land. And so I was going to ask you specifically about your experience with the socials. So I appreciate you reiterating that.
Yeah.
Because that was where I was going, So the last, and just to kind of start wrapping it up, because I think we've given everybody a really, really good idea of kind of what your podcast is and what you do and why you're out there. And I love it. I appreciate you guys sharing all this stuff today. But if you could give any advice at all to the person who is alone, who's starting it up. I mean, maybe they are an expert on a topic and it's them and a mic in a dark room and they're like, oh man, what am I going to do now? What advice can you give to somebody who is trying to start or is new or is alone? Go for it.
So, with podcasting, just kind of uh, a natural truth of it is that there is no natural way to get your podcast out without talking about it. So, unfortunately, like we're not on the radio where somebody can just randomly flip to you and suddenly now you have an audience, or a YouTube thing where you show up on a possible you might like kind of thing. That doesn't exist in the podcasting world. So in the podcasting world, the only people that know you are people that have been told about you in some way, shape, or form. So because of that, it's okay to know that you don't have a big audience or anything like that your first year or two or longer. Um it takes a long time to build up some sort of a big audience. So don't feel like you're alone in the small, when most people that are doing podcasting don't have a ton of listeners, and are making six figures doing podcasting. I haven't met one of them yet. If you know any, please shoot them our way. But so just know that is kind of a reality of podcasting, is that you are going to be talking to yourself for a little while. Eventually, though, what'll happen is that small group will incrementally get larger as they continue to go out and talk about you. Because everyone's having conversations every day. And somewhere along the line, somebody's going to have a conversation related to your podcast. They're going to say, hey, I listened to this thing a while back. You should check it out. And that's how it's going to get spread. It's very slow and tedious and long, and it kind of sucks. But as it goes, it makes it worthwhile. So have passion in the show and what you're trying to do, not trying to make yourself a giant podcast, because it's not going to happen if your goal is to get big. And so the goal is to enjoy it as you go. Mhm.
That's
And I,
awesome. How about you, Nick? What do you got?
Mhm.
so I would say it's kind of a twofold. One is don't give up.
Mhm.
Right? It's very easy your first couple of years, even the first couple of months, you're like, oh man, I'm putting all this time and effort into this, but no one seems to be catching on. And there's a moment where you get to decide whether that's going to discourage you and deter you from moving forward, or whether that's going to fuel you to be like, okay, we're going to continue to do this because somewhere down the road, someone's going to listen to this and love it. And that'll take off. And in the meantime, I'm fine. Like Steve said, I'm fine just talking to myself in the meantime, because somewhere down the road, someone's going to listen to it and go, you're not alone. I love this. We're going to do something with it.
Mhm.
The other thing, the other piece of advice I would give, had my wife and I had dinner with friends. He's not a big whiskey drinker, but he's got a few bottles. So he pulled out a bottle and he poured some for me and he goes, hey, what does bottled and bond mean? Like, what is that? I see bottles like that. What does that mean? And I kid you not, I nerded out for probably half an hour to 45 minutes. And he's sitting there. His wife has already gotten up from the table, like going to get something else to eat. My wife is like, oh, here we go again. And he's sitting there and he's like, I don't know that I understood anything that you said because I don't get whiskey. But what I understood was that we all nerd out about something. We're all nerds. Growing up, it was the thing to be picked on, bullied. Oh, you're a nerd. You're a nerd over this. And he's like, I got older and realized everyone's nerds, but we're all nerds in something different.
Mhm.
And that's okay. He said, I love watching people nerd out about what they're passionate about because it shows me they're passionate about something. Even if I don't understand it, I love watching them nerd out. So don't be afraid to nerd out about what you're doing. If it's something you're passionate about, there's gonna be another person in the room or around you that if you let yourself go and nerd out about it, they're gonna join you and go, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Like I want to be a part of this now. Like I can't believe I found someone else that nerds out about the same thing that I do. I thought I was alone. So don't be afraid to nerd out. Don't be afraid to go out and do these things. Just talk about it. Chris loves doing this. So he'll go to distilleries, he'll go on vacation, and all of a sudden next thing you know, he's nerding out like, oh, we got this whiskey podcast. We're doing this, we're doing that. And people are like, what are you doing? What does that mean? What does that look like? And he was the person like me that we knew the least amount of information about podcasts and what that meant. And now he's like, oh, you do this, you do that, like almost like he's an expert in these things now. But he finds a way to nerd out to people, that people see it and they see a passion. They say, I want that passion. I want to have a passion about something. If it's not something I love right now, maybe I can find someone else that will enjoy, because I can be like Steve and say, hey, I heard this podcast a while ago. You might enjoy it. And then it starts to follow that pattern of nerding out. More people wanting to nerd out with you. And don't be afraid to do that.
I mean, I think you just came up with, like a whole new way to monetize your podcast.
Right.
I don't know if it's on a pillow or on a bumper sticker or t-shirts,
Right.
but I'm
don't be afraid
seeing,
to nerd out.
yeah, don't be afraid to nerd out, or, like sit down, take a sip, nerd out. I mean, that's free. You want to use it? It's all yours.
There we go. All right.
But I mean, that's just, you guys are killing me. That's awesome. I love the passion that you guys both have for it. I love, how just, I don't know, the way you guys come across. I mean, your energy's awesome. You can tell that you guys love what you're doing. And I really think that's 90% of podcasting is just loving what you're doing and enjoying it, and I love what you said too. Steve, it was, you don't want to try to be Joe Rogan necessarily. You know what I mean? Right out of the gate. It's like everybody, when you look at the podcast groups that are online, and I'm involved in a lot of them, everybody that's starting off new either wants to know, how can I get ad sales? How can I grow to, be Joe Rogan, or how can, I monetize like right now? It's like, dude, no one's even spoken to you yet. You haven't even had a conversation.
Right.
So it's great advice from both you guys. I love that very much.
I think
Go ahead.
the idea, like you had said, we want to jump in right away, so we want to monetize one of these things. You asked us how we got started, the equipment. And in those moments when we were doing it, man, they were growing pains. They hurt so bad. But now looking back at those, I don't know that I could speak for Steve, maybe.
Sure.
Looking back at those things, even when it comes to like editing, looking back at it now, I'm like, I'm really glad that we had those experiences, because we wouldn't even know where to start if we didn't have those experiences. Those are kind of the building blocks that allowed us to do what we're doing now, and walk into a situation and go, ooh, this is going to be really bad. Let's step back. Let's take a moment and let's rethink this before we jump into it. Whereas had we not had those experiences, we would have been like, oh, let's go for it. Who cares? Like, it'll be fine. It'll take care of itself. Sometimes the growing pains are worth it.
Growing pains. I mean, people don't even understand that that's just part of podcasting. That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. You guys, thank you so much. I'm going to make sure that I send you some invites to our private Facebook group. I know how you feel about Facebook now, but we do have a private Facebook group for anybody who's a podcaster and wants to get rolling, and especially anybody who's been on the show. I hope you guys will join it. I hope that you'll, chime in, give advice just like you're doing now to anybody who's in there. Post your episodes. It's one of those things where we all try to kind of help each other grow. And it's the group is THEPodcasterNation, and I'll send you guys an invite for that.
Perfect.
But I've really enjoyed talking to you guys today. I thank you so much for coming on here. You are one of our first 10. You know what I mean? On this awesome project we're putting together. I have people contacting me now, a lot of them, but and I know we're going to grow, but the first 10 is what's going to set the tone. And with the people we already have and you guys added in there, I think we've just got a fantastic flavor going right now for the show, pun intended.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's
Absolutely.
been a great time, and we're really excited to see where it all goes, and to get in that Facebook group and see how other people can help us and how we can help them.
It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
All right. Your contact info. I would be remiss if we didn't do that. Now I know that this is a little tricky because I got tripped up in the. Go ahead and tell them. You tell
growing
them.
pains. Growing pains.
Exactly.
Growing pains.
Yeah. Our if you wanted to get a hold of us, our email is whiskeychaserpod. Nope, that's a lie. whiskeychaserclub @gmail.com.
All right.
We ought to make a third one because we also changed our name at the beginning.
Yes, you did.
That's a
Oh
whole
my
nother
gosh.
story.
We got a
All right,
cease and
so
We got a
desist,
cease and
so-
desist from somebody
yeah.
else, so I had a whole thing.
let's start over. All right. I
But,
gave it to you so you wouldn't confuse everybody. Hold
Yeah,
on
no,
a
right?
second.
Our email is whiskeychaserclub@gmail.com.
There you go. All right.
Our website is whiskeychaserspod.com.
Awesome. And that'll be in the show notes so that you folks won't have to worry about how to spell it. But
Yeah, don't have to type it. Yeah.
if you're trying to, reach these guys, you got something to say to them and you're trying to do it on your phone, at least you heard it and you can make it all happen. So
There you go.
gentlemen, thank you for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate you very much. Folks, if you are a podcaster, if you are an experienced podcaster and you want to get a little bit of a bump and you want to get involved with other folks, if you're a new podcaster and you're sitting there in your closet with a blanket over your head and you're going, I don't know how to do this, I don't know what the first step is. Folks, if you are putting out a show or thinking of putting out a show, contact me. I want to interview you. Join our Facebook group. There's people like me. There's people like these guys right here who are going to just give you all the information they can give, share their experiences with you, and help you get through your growing pains. All right. So I can't wait to see all you folks on the other side. Thank you for listening to the Podcaster Nation, and we'll talk to you all soon. Until next time.